Hey friends, welcome to the Kirkpatrick Podcast. It is your girl Vanessa, and I am so excited to be here with my new friend, Dr. Amy Heaton. She is here we're gonna have like a real talk today about what does learning, performance, evaluation, the Kirkpatrick Model, life look like coming up here in 2025. So for those of you that have not had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Heaton, she serves as the CEO and Managing Director of Lynchpin International. And in that capacity, she manages projects and client relations and ensures both quality and timeliness of contract execution. She works seamlessly across government agencies, nonprofits, academia, and the private sector to build and assess the efficacy of education, training, and research programs. Girl, thank you for being here. Again,
That's
when
a whole
do you
mouthful.
sleep?
My goodness, I've never heard any of that read out loud.
When do you sleep, though? Really?
We have to put these bios and these huge CVs together for contracts, but you never ever anticipate them being read out loud.
And now they're being read on the Kirkpatrick Podcast. I mean, what a life lived, what a career lived so far. Tell me about your most proudest moment in your career history.
Wow. That's interesting. I have some internal wins that are usually when I succeed in like fighting for someone else, right? Like let's say there's somebody on my team that I'd like to get in place with a client and I can see their hopes and dreams. I'm able to organize talent and put them in positions that are great for them. So those are some personal ones that I always love. And I think early on, I think just getting my first prime contract was huge, right? Sometimes you get a little bit of resistance within the Department of Defense once you're starting out to build your capability, but also to come across as credible. And so I've even had folks yell across tables at me that, what do you know you've never been shot at? And that is a valid point. And so I feel as though just getting a prime contract as someone who is coming in with a doctorate in something that's a little bit odd in linguistics, but I think that was a really big win for me, just realizing that I could.
Amazing. So tell us, I obviously read your bio, but I mean, that's not really all of you. Tell the audience a little bit more about you and where your passion for learning and performance and human systems came from.
I actually started out as an English as a second language teacher, back in the day. And then I thought to myself, I have to do something bigger with this than teaching. I want to do something more at a programmatic level. And I ended up going to graduate school just to know more about how to do it better. And then I realized I had this passion for making things faster, better, more effective. I started to notice, while working in academia, that things could just be done. The systems around instruction could be optimized. Let's put it that way. And so I just noticed that across all my clients, whether, it was private sector, academia, government, that there's the same problems, which is that if you're training people so that they change their behavior, whether it's so that they can teach others English as a second language, or whether you're training folks in DARI within the military space, or whether you're, in HR onboarding folks, you have the same issues. Same thing like with leadership development courses. I kept noticing that in order to change people's behaviors, you have to sort of change the environment that they're into at the same time, right? So I just started to get really interested in that piece of the learning and development space is like, how do we change the culture, the human systems, the policies? Because we can do everything that we want to tell a person that they can change their behavior in these, we can prescribe it. We can give them all the different metrics for their own personal success. But I started to notice that the piece I'm the most interested in is sort of all the moving parts around like, where do you put that person in their job afterwards? And what does that environment look and feel like? is it conducive to allowing them to use the skills you just trained them in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We ask everyone this. So before I get to our next question, I need to know first and foremost, how did you hear about the Kirkpatrick model and your thoughts?
Honestly, I don't remember the first time I heard about the Kirkpatrick model because it is bandied about so often within the Department of Defense space. And that is where I've done the majority of my work since 2010. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's every proposal that we've ever written. If I am working for another company, we're going to align our training program to the Kirkpatrick model. We state which level we're going to get people to. I would probably not want to be on a proposal where we didn't say what level within Kirkpatrick we were going to get people to, because that means you're not providing any metrics whatsoever. And so I think that within the government space in particular, what I love is that you're using taxpayer dollars. So the RFPs that come to us as private sector who are bidding on these jobs, it requires that you demonstrate how you know that what you're providing government is going to work, right? Mm-hmm. And Kirkpatrick just seems like the go-to thing that we were all using to say, this is how we know. And then I've worked with some instructional designers who've been through the training, and I started to notice how much better their instructional design was, because as they were building the courses, they were aligning it to like expectations of what they were telling clients that those people were going to be able to do, right? And that at the end of the day, everybody in military, everyone in government needs to know those outcomes, because they're fighting for budget, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to convince the people that are in your front office that you know there's going to be an impact of this training, right? And so I think it's just the most common model that's used within the government space. It's the only one I've ever really even heard of within government contracting that folks use to sort of demonstrate that they are evaluating what they are developing as they go, meaning they're going to set up metrics of success. They're going to define what good looks like, and then they're going to kind of backwards engineer their learning objectives from there, and then collect the data on performance that they're going to need to prove that they've gotten to a level 3. So I just pretty much all the partners I've had, we have used this model, and I think it's how we've won work. Mm-hmm. And I think that it gives program managers on the government side kind of like a way to breathe easy, because they know, okay, at the end of the day, I'm not going to have to scramble when something comes down from the front office saying, prove your budget numbers, right? Prove why we're still paying for this. Often it's multiple $1 million, right, of training. Mm-hmm. Why are we paying for this unless you can prove that there's a change in behavior, right? In the individual or an impact at the organizational level. And so I think that folks are now starting to realize, hey, it is so stressful. No one wants to be in that position of being caught like empty-handed when the boss comes and says, hey, I really need to prove. Sometimes it's even to Congress, right? This is not like low-level problems. This is really serious. That the thing that we're funding is worthwhile. And so I think that's kind of my passion about it, and why I'm interested in working with Kirkpatrick partners.
Amazing. So you were talking just before I had to interject and ask about the Kirkpatrick model. You've been working in education and training in all of your roles, from academia to government, for about 20 years. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges facing professionals in this space, and what do you see as the better way forward, or a better way forward?
Wow. So we're defining problems, right? So we've both been in this space, I know, and I bet we're probably aligned on some of the problems we're seeing. Mm-hmm. I suppose I touched on one of them. I think there's about 3 that I can mention, and then I can maybe go into like more detail on them. But I think the first one is that the human systems around training and learning and development, they don't change, right, when you change people. So I think getting organizations to understand that if you're going to send people out to a leadership training, for example, if you want them to stay in the organization and not leave for a better opportunity after you've paid for that training, you have to then provide funding or additional personnel or a policy that unlocks, a system or unties their hands when they come back, trained as a leader, to be able to implement the things that they just learned. So that's what I mean by sort of changing the human systems policy and culture, right? At the same time. Don't expect for folks to be able to, one individual to go get trained in some skill and then come back and just expect them to carry the whole load and burden with a few concepts that they've learned, right? That's a real issue. The second one is like professional development, right? For anyone who's in any instructor role, whether they be a professor at a university, or if they are, an instructor in HR, like onboarding folks, it doesn't matter. I think that folks often think you can get trained in one thing and then know it for the rest of your career. And that's just not how it works, right? New concepts come down, in research and academia, or from like a government research project that might have been conducted by a big box like RAND. And I think folks really need to be, learning project management, program management, personnel management as they go up the kind of ladder. So you often see folks who are a great technical expert in their area of expertise, right? They might have a PhD in literal rocket science, right? And maybe they get a job at NASA, or they might have a job in curriculum and instruction. And they might be a professor at Columbia University. But like, let's say you're in academia, do you get trained once you get a grant to then manage all the folks who you wrote the grant for, right? You might have like 10 graduate students, and all of a sudden you went from being a curriculum and instruction expert to now being a project manager and a manager of personnel. But at what point did you ever get trained in doing those skills, right? It's just not something that we think about. Just because you have a PhD in something and you're great at teaching doesn't mean you're going to be immediately great at managing human beings, right? There's like gaps in that area. And I think I see a lot of this with like technology, that folks aren't necessarily, I don't mean like training like on how to use each new technology, each new learning management system or new learning app that comes out, right? I mean, sort of training in like a mindset around how to only go for technologies that solve an actual problem that you have, right? Not getting sort of like wowed by the latest, greatest whiz bang piece of tech that's kind of a shiny object, and like having that drive what you're doing. I think that if there were more of an understanding that, instructors, professors, whoever should identify their own problems and then be coached into how to find technology that specifically scratches that itch. I think that kind of professional development would be great. And I think the last thing that I usually encounter, and I think this is where we would have the most overlap too, is on measurement, right? Measurement, metrics of success, like folks funding programs, starting new projects, new educational programs where folks are not necessarily forced to define what you want those outcomes to be, what good looks like, right? And then aligning the training to that and having a model of some sort that that you can use to apply to that problem.
I want to touch a little bit more on what you were talking about when it comes to the human systems and policies and the culture. I think that's a huge concern I hear from folks that we speak to when we talk about, applying this work. And often it's, to your point, one person coming in to our certification program and then meant to change the entire culture to actually evaluate.
Right.
But then they go back to the same system, the same situation. And what are they going to do? They're going to go back to their comfort zone. And I don't blame them, because there is no reward for for doing things differently, actually more often than not, like, you know, at the end of the day, the only reason that you stay doing something is because you start to get those dopamine hits. That's why we talk about like level 4 leading indicators and like short-term wins, so that people stay on the course, right? So you get that hit of dopamine, like, yes, this is working. Yes, this is working. It's why I cross off eating yogurt on my to-do list, because it's like, wow, I accomplished something, even though I ate it 10 hours ago. You know, you have to start to do that. And when, you know, what I notice is that folks in our programs will get those dopamine hits like throughout the program, because they're in an environment in which they're getting that feedback and they're getting that response, and they're starting to see and having those conversations of the abilities, or possibilities. And then they go back and they're like, I can't do level 3 monitoring and adjusting because I can't talk to the trainees. They go out and they do their thing and I never talk to them again. Or, you know, I'm being given an order. I've got to create this training and do all of these things. And so I think that there is so much opportunity to really think about what kind of support do we, like, if we want to make evaluation a thing in our organization, frankly, it can't just be on us to figure out, to give ourselves that accountability to do it. Right? Like, I always say, I know what I'm supposed to do at the gym. I've done all the programs. I've had my health coach that tells me, eating well and this and that, but I'm never more accountable, and my behavior does not more automatically change when I have that person by my side to, number one, help me with obstacles. Like, I'm about to go to a conference. You and I were just at ITSIC together, right? I'm about to be at this conference. We all know the conference food is awful, and not exactly conducive to, like eating healthy and well. Here's my options. What can I do? Can you help me make that choice? You know, I'm defined, like, this is my constraint. Help me make that choice. Or like going to, like, my form is never more on point than when I'm in like a class or I've got the personal trainer there. And we need that, because then after a while it becomes second nature. You don't necessarily need that support. But when you send someone through a program or training, leadership development or something, there needs to be some sort of support to help actually implement.
Yes. You know, that I have to say, first of all, you are not the only organization that experiences this. I have even heard from leadership at Ivy League institutions that do these certificates in like executive leadership. Those certificate programs, they've got them in almost everything now, but I've worked mostly with the leadership programs, and this is so uncanny, but there are some that are very successful, meaning they have run some really high name folks through their programs that are contemplating having to close their doors. And you know, the reason why? It's because the organizations are primarily paying for their employees to come to these training programs. So they're offsite, right? Like they go to the university, or they do them, online, and might have like a few on-site meetings, for the whole certificate. But it's their organization that pays for them. And when the person comes back, the person's transformed. I work a lot with like authentic leadership and transformational leadership. And so the person is transformed if it's a good program. So they come back, and what do? Within 6 months, they're out the door. Within 3 months of going back to their organization, they don't want to be there anymore, because they've learned all these things and they've come back to this kind of stale environment where, now these corporations or these other universities that have paid for these people to go out are saying, hey, we're not going to pay for this anymore, because it's creating churn within our organization to send our people to your programs. Yes, it might have been great for that person, but now it's not great for us because we've lost that institutional knowledge. We've lost that person, right? And so don't you think that should start encouraging us to have like conversations with clients at the beginning that says, like, unless you're committed to change within your organization, you need to consider like whether or not you want to send the people to us, because they are going to be so qualified. They will have the ability to make changes within the organization, but you've got to let them. So it can't be that kind of like, you just go get your continuing education, credit, and then just come back. they'll rotate out of that position so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's that, like upfront having conversations with the organizations who are sending people and say, please be committed to supporting them when they come back in. Even just a small conversation, I think, to set expectations can help.
Yeah.
But I think it's also about, like, it's almost like I've seen folks do like coaching, right? So let's say you've sent someone out to a leadership training program. I've seen some of the private leadership training programs, not necessarily the ones that are at universities, but private programs will then afterwards give you a coach or a cohort support, right? Where the people that you went through the training with will be your kind of like accountability partners for at least 6 months to a year.
Yep.
Like creating something. And I don't know if you've got that within Kirkpatrick Partners, but there could be something where you have like folks who went through the cohort together that do like-minded work, that there's kind of like a network or a talent pool of professionals who are kind of like supporting one another.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's like, coaching back at the like continued ongoing coaching. And something I've noticed too is that it's some of the certificate programs at universities are a little bit selective, but there's other business models where you're not having to apply to get in, right? That you and I'm not sure how yours works, if what you're doing for evaluation criteria as you come in, but it seems like if people aren't applying and saying you've got to have at least a background in instructional design or a bachelor's in some kind of education, then I wonder, like, did those folks need more support? Like, how does that work? Have you done any research within Kirkpatrick to see like who comes in and what their performance is on the way out? Like, that might be cool to do.
Yeah, we haven't done that specific, like an actual study of it, more institutional. And, when I came in and I purchased the company last year, I really spent a lot of time listening and hearing from folks, like, what are the challenges that you're still having? I review every single survey, from, after the programs and things like that. And the common theme is like, this is all great, but I'm still going to go back to not a great environment. And that's where we launched the ability to hire Kirkpatrick certified instructional systems designers, coaches, consultants to help solve this problem, because people don't know what they don't know. Right. And, oftentimes I think too, we can get bogged down in how, this is the way we've always done things here. Right. And we don't necessarily want to have conversations, department to department, or this is something big in the military, right? Branch to branch, to learn each other's best practices. But our coaches and consultants have those opportunity to see from a more of a 30-foot or 50,000 level, right? And see, well, this works over there. Maybe there's something that we can apply here to utilize as a strategy, and help to have some of those more difficult conversations when we're talking about policy, culture change, and the system and the environment in which we're doing things. It's hard for someone who checks off that they're going to do this as part of their CEU for the year to say, okay, well, now we're going to have a conversation about like institutional change, when I have, there's a hierarchy, right? And there's rank, who am I to have this conversation? So it's a lot more difficult, and not that I believe that someone, a higher ranking official or stakeholder would necessarily not want to hear from that person. But sometimes when you get a third party to take a look at what's happening, you value that perspective differently. No better, no worse, just differently. And so that is where, that idea and that conversation with the team was, okay, we need to help not just staff the people that are going to start doing training differently and start doing instruction differently, because that's a skill in and of itself, and it takes a long time to learn it and get there. But also, we need to staff the people that are going to actually help support those systems and help support the change, like do the change management, because that's a specialized skill set, and it can't just be rested on one human or even a small group of humans to do that for an entire department.
I have to say, Vanessa, I think we're going to have to take over the world and change the term from change management to change leadership. We can do this together. I'm a linguist.
Yep.
I can already see how the language can be changed. Change management to me, doesn't it mean like that you're kind of behind the curve? Like in my mind, it means like, oh no, I've got to now go manage this thing that like is kind of out of control. I've got to get it under control. I feel like, I want to move to saying change leadership, right? Because we know what we're doing. We have stakeholder engagement from the very beginning, so we don't have to go back later and do buy-in, right? Because folks owned it from the very beginning. So we don't have to manage things behind the curve. We can just be like leading it and having folks at every level within the organization leading it. And I know that's in your heart and that's how you perform on the job. I feel like we should change that term. But that's a complete aside. I wonder, so you're talking about these new capabilities of putting folks in place to kind of help build that institutional capability within your partner organizations. Do you do something like a train the trainer? Because I wonder, so I'm picturing you've got somebody who goes back to their organization. They might have done quite a bit of training themselves, like given training on their area of expertise, but might there be an opportunity to extend like a bronze or extend a silver and say like, hey, we're going to give you this train the trainer so that if you don't have an appetite at your institution, for example, to pay for coaching or to pay for like ongoing cohort support within our network or something like that, but we'll just tack on this little train the trainer piece so that we can help you build institutional capability within your organization through the person that you've selected to send to us.
Yeah.
Because I really feel like that's the feedback that I get a lot of times is like, it's particularly the case within government and especially the case within military that folks rotate out of positions every 2 to 3 years, right? And it's just that institutional capability. Folks are losing an appetite sometimes for continually sending people out to training and then they're out the door. So could we, like, I don't know if a train the trainer is the best way. Coaching, like I feel like there's a lot of different options that you can do all of them maybe.
I think you're kind of talking about two different things, right? So I think that there's a train the trainer of like, how do so we've got our instructional systems designers, we've developed a program of like, how do we use the Kirkpatrick model to do instructional design? So now it's taking away. So like bronze and silver are really about the evaluation, but we touch on like instructional design principles and we talk about these things like required drivers and how do you develop the training to be, or the learning event to be, performance-based, behavior-based, right? But not really how really dive into how do you do that. This certification program we're calling a, performance designer, right? This is someone that's designing performance solutions to help actually create change and change behavior. And it's like, how do you do that from the beginning, from the request coming in? What are the questions that you ask that person to actually get to that level 4 result? How do you take that level 4 result and then, or that reason, right? And that goal, how do you take that and identify where, if the environment is going to be conducive to this change, if training is actually the problem, is it the right solution? And then how do you identify what are the what we call in our world required drivers, but what are the tools that we're going to need to put in place in order to maintain and sustain this change so people can get their reps in? And then how do you build that into like a project plan?
That's a good point. Yeah, it's about getting in reps, right? So, often folks can't afford a long time to like your bite-sized, bronze package is what they can afford time away from their job or in addition to their job. It's what you've probably over years, I'm sure that the previous owners and you have figured out like what that exact sort of time is that people can afford to do.
Right. And that's the problem, right? It's like we can only take them out of work for so long and away from their job, right? So we've got that sort of certification program, and that we will come in and help to train your instructional designers. But then also there's the capability that we have where it's like, do you want to be a Kirkpatrick certified organization or unit, if you will?
Yeah.
Here are the tools and the metrics in order to do that. Like, here's how we need to see your standard operating procedures. Here's our toolbox, right? And let us come in and help you alongside. You can DIY it, or, we can support you in the actual writing and implementation. And also to your point of change management, the change leadership needed to institute such a change, right? But bronze and silver and evaluation and changing, it doesn't, let's take bronze and silver out of it, right? Changing the way we do things does not work if the environment in which they're going to be in is conducive to that. So if we're not going to first look at that environment and say, here's the policies in place that we're going to put in the instruction that we need to say, we are going to measure everything that's mission critical to level 4. We're going to measure everything that's not mission critical to level 3. Here are the tools and templates that we have available to start from. Here's that, powered by Kirkpatrick unit in a box. Yeah. And then say, here you go, start here. And then you want to bring in your people as they come in to do the certification programs. Great. Because guess what? If they leave, no problem. You still have the foundation, which is your policies, your procedures to train up the next person how to do the model, right? And how to do the blended evaluation and all of that. And you don't lose that institutional knowledge, because that institutional knowledge isn't just in their head. It's actually in how we are formed as a unit.
That is exactly what I'm seeing as like the itch that needs to be scratched, is like, how do we sort of transform or augment what you're doing with the certification to make sure that that institutional knowledge stays in the institution who paid for the certification, right? I think that's a big motivator for folks to send more people to your training programs, would be like, we know what we as an organization are going to get. And honestly, this direction sort of fits with your level 4, right? Like that you're measuring the impact, right? Of not just the change in behavior, like how does rolled up change of behavior of multiple personnel now have a systemic effect? Yeah. And it's that level 4 that everybody really wants to get to. But an individual getting to level 4, like that doesn't really mean anything. Like, what does that mean? Like, it has to be organizationally that you're seeing an impact, right? There's not going to be an impact on anyone's ROI, anyone's bottom line. Like, you're not going to, like, this misconception, if folks are thinking that they're going to send someone to like a gold training and then their whole organization is, for the cost of a gold training, going to change.
Right. And
it's not that, right?
Well, and then, so like in government, there's a big push right now to make government more human. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before, right? And how can we make government more human, right? So what they do is they'll send people, to your point, to these leadership development programs and maybe customer service trainings and things like that to help support those things. But then those people come back. And the system is not supportive and conducive to actually make government more human. And so I think we need to start looking more organizationally and systemically in order to create change. And it's actually not that difficult. And I know that people are probably like, Vanessa, you've obviously not worked in government. I have. But the reason I say it's not that difficult is you have partners that want to support you. You can get the support. You can get the things in place to start laying the foundation. It's actually like the implementation and the change leadership is actually the most difficult part, right?
Right.
And not necessarily like the implementation of those policies, unless like we're changing like, I don't know, the Constitution. But like when we're talking about the actual hard work,
right?
Instruction gets written all the time. You know this. You've done it. You've seen it. It's how do we actually institutionalize it so people remember it, and it actually starts to then infiltrate beyond.
I think that sometimes when folks are on the fence about whether or not they want to hire me or hire my partners or build a program, the thing they want to know is, how is doing XYZ going to impact my bottom line, right? If it's in the private sector, it's usually like, what's my return on investment if I do this, right? Yep. Can you prove to me that if we start doing instructional design within HR, within these like career learning, lifelong learning pathways that we're trying to develop within our employees, so they stay with the companies, they grow with the company. If we start measuring how the training aligns to their performance on the job, like how is this going to, impact my bottom line? And I think there's a lot of research out there on churn and what the numbers are on, if you lose employees and then you have to spin new people up, and organizations, I think, are starting to wake up to this notion that it's really within their best interest to keep people there. I
Yeah.
remember our parents' generation would like, my father worked for Michelin for something like almost 40 years, right? Our parents'
Mm-hmm.
generation was like, you get your one job and you grow with the company and you just stay there. Like there was
Yep.
always this fear. And I know within technology, if you don't move within 2 years, you're dead, right? Like you
Yep.
need to like constantly be, and it's just huge different cultural expectation around how long you're going to stay within an organization. And I think that it's swung like this big pendulum to one direction since our parents' generation. Now
Yep.
we're kind of going back and we're saying, like, okay, we actually want to keep people in our organization and grow them because
Mm-hmm.
they have, like, how do we incentivize them to bring their best ideas to our organization, to stay here, to not go out and do their own startup, right?
Right.
I think folks are starting to understand you want to keep people in the club, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is a new wave that I'm seeing within HR, is this understanding. So I wonder if that kind of might speak to the narrative of some of your clients too, that like there is a lot of data that shows if you can keep people in place and grow them within your organization, there's a lot of benefit to your organization. So here's how we're going to partner with you to, help you retain people. And it's a
Yeah.
huge problem within the military, right? You see folks doing a certain thing within the military and then they go out and they're in the private sector, they get gobbled up by the private sector quickly, and that's great. And how can we keep some of that within the government sector as well, right? Not
Yeah.
having a government brain drain.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit about and talk a little bit about what's the work that you're doing. So you do human design workshops. So is that the same as like learner centered? What does human centered design mean? And what are you doing next with it?
Oh, that's such a huge and a very loaded question. And I'm certain I'm going to answer this question incorrectly to anyone who's actually properly trained in human-centered design, right?
All good.
We saw a workshop by, I think, a colleague of yours, Dr. Sid, who was
Yep.
phenomenal. She did a great job of showing other folks. I was only able to pop in and out of her workshop, but she had a very limited time in a workshop to teach others how to do human-centered design. And I wish I could have sat in for more of it, but the parts I saw, she was teaching folks how to do empathetic interviewing as the number
Mm-hmm.
one stage. If I had to break it down, I think human-centered design was born out of the Stanford design school, right?
Which she would
And
also agree with.
there's a company, I think it's a for-profit company, not a nonprofit, called IDEO. I don't know if I'm even pronouncing it correctly. And I've worked with folks who used to work there, who are trained in their way of doing human-centered design. And then I've been a participant in lots of these workshops. And then I started to just sort of research how to do it myself. And I started doing them myself to whatever degree that I am capable of. But the results have been phenomenal. Like the things that you can get done in a short amount of time. People have raved about these workshops. Like they feel as though it was the answer to everything that was
Mm-hmm.
burning questions for them. So I'm going to put it in a nutshell of how I understand it. Whether it is technology, whether it is like developing a new toothpaste tube, or for me, what I use human-centered design for is designing new human systems and business processes within organizations. You can use it for designing anything, but specifically what it is, at its most basic, bare bones, stripping it down to like, what are you actually doing here with this term? It's like literally asking people who you want to work with what their problems are,
Mm-hmm.
and working a long time to actually hear from their perspective what their problems are, separate from and before you actually start the problem solving process, right? So what that does is it allows those folks with the empathetic interviewing, you're usually just giving one very broad question and you are listening. You're doing active listening. And letting, you follow up with certain things that they say, which lets them guide where they're going. And, I call it like me being the complaints department, because if you make folks comfortable enough, oh, well, they will tell you their problems. Like
Yep.
it's partly like building rapport and building trust with folks so that, they want to tell you what their problems are. But you end up with this really rich data set. And from that, there's ways within the workshop that you do it that are kind of like logistics that are too complicated to go into. But from that, you build personas around the person who has that problem. Like you might have 5 people interviewing that same stakeholder group within one workshop. So all those people who interviewed those people can get together and build kind of like either a drawing, an acted out instantiation of what that person's problem are. And then you kind of like start the brainstorming and the prototyping stage after that, based on what that persona is. And at all stages of this, it's a little bit like the agile process in software development, where you're checking back in with the person for whom you're solving a problem to make sure that you identified the correct problem, to make sure that you're on the right page, that you haven't like taken it off into like assuming a bunch of things that weren't true about that person or problem set. So you're constantly checking back in. Is this correct? Is this right? So it's like you're building like these use case narratives, is what you'd call it in the software world, in the design world. There, you're building use case narratives for problems like that you now need to go solve, and you can prototype anything then. And you can use role playing to prototype it. You can use actually going into a design space like they have at the D School, like a maker space, right? Mm-hmm. And like actually getting out, saws and, hammers, and actually building prototypes, kind of like models like architects would. Or you can just do it with role playing and actual activities. And at all times, you're displaying it back to the person for whom you're solving and getting feedback from that. But I specifically like to get like all of the stakeholders within one room to do this. And there's one reason why. You're not just getting you're a person who has a specific problem. Let's say it's a student, right?
Yeah.
A student who wants to learn a foreign language better, but they want to do it using technology, right? So they're going to explain what their daily life is like, right? And it might be like, look, I am completely booked. Do you know what it's like to be a student right now? Here, let me tell you what my problems are. And what we need to do is find, like we kind of realize through this process that what we need to do is build or use or redesign a micro learning app so that it fits into their actual daily life. Like, what are you doing while you're at the bus stop? What are you doing while you're in the line at the grocery store, right? Mm-hmm. But in the room, you need to have students, instructors, like the actual programmers, like engineers, like the people who know how the software is built. You need to have your funders, right? The people who are going to be responsible for paying for this. Because what I've seen happen wrong when people do this is if you don't get the right stakeholders in the room, you're great during the brainstorming initiative, but when the rubber hits the road and you have to actually develop something, you've now built something that's going to cost $80 million. Right. And we really, if you had just had that program manager with the purse strings in the room, they would have been like, yeah, well, we had $500,000, so I'm glad you had fun for 2 days at this workshop, out in the Silicon Valley. But like, you should have asked me to come because I could rein it in. And there's always a space for the wet blanket kind of personality in this design process. I never want to pretend like, during brainstorming, you kind of have to kind of have them to the side. But at the end, when you're coming back to the convergence stage and when the rubber hits the road and you're actually designing something that's going to be implemented, you want those wet blanket folks in your design process. You want them to say, but this is not going to work for all these different reasons. This is not within the capability of designing, at this point. Like, we don't have the money, or Google's already done this, and Google or Apple can't do this for $100 million. Why do you think you can do it for $500,000, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have those folks in and part of the process. So that's kind of how I conceptualize and have seen or done workshops in human-centered design. What I want to do more of is using it to build business processes and protocols within organizations. I think that's radical. I've done it twice where I have had folks use this role-playing techniques that I learned actually from the theater world. And so I don't really always tell my clients what we're exactly going to do. Just show up to the workshop, and then all of a sudden they're doing these very odd role-playing events. But they seem to love it and clamor for more of it. And I think that that that's the piece that I think hasn't been done enough is like, let's pay attention to not just prototyping things, right? Not just going out and making new things. Let's actually fix the culture problems with human-centered design. Let's work on how we're fitting this new product or process back into a larger system. Yeah. I think that stuff's so exciting.
I think that and that's an opportunity for us to also implement that as we're thinking of, instructional design processes and things like that, right? When we design, we so often design from our own perspective. Well, like, this is what I think that people need, or like, this is what's best practice. And it's like, okay, but like, they may need the opportunity to go away for 2 days and to dive in there, but if that's not reality, what they can do, you got to figure something else out. And so it's taking, it's back to being empathetic, right? And putting ourselves in our learner shoes and our human shoes, but not just their shoes. But if we want their boss to agree with it, we want their boss in the room so he feels like he had a say. It's like,
yes.
You never watch.
I don't understand these words like buy-in. Honestly, I'm like,
right?
Why are you hiring me to go get buy-in? If you're hiring me for that, I don't know if you're an organization that I can work with, because you should have been doing this human-centered design process around your stakeholder engagement the entire time. Yep. And if you weren't doing that, I'm coming from behind the curve and I'm handicapped, and you don't, it's like you've tied my hands behind my back. I'm going out and trying to convince people. It's that adage about like making sure you have the pedagogical pull instead of the technological push, right? Like the magpie effect of like, it works with technology, but it works with every other thing in business too. Like, right. Stop trying to sell me something that already exists that you developed, and then shoving it down the throats of folks who never signed up for that. That's what the human-centered design stops. Like it ends at. It says, no, let's work on this together. Let's get folks in the room. And where I see it for Kirkpatrick is like, hey, could you use Kirkpatrick to maybe look at change leadership? We call it change management, whatever it is that the buzzword's going to be, right? To measure change in organizations as you're going. Like, could this be part of the human-centered design process, that it's not just learning and development? But is it like a situation where, we want to measure impact across the whole organization. We want to get the whole organization to level 4, but we're going to assess a program that we just launched. Maybe it was an implementation of a new technology. We're going to roll out this new Salesforce instantiation at our organization. And so we work with like whoever is implementing their Salesforce to say, okay, what is success going to look like? I'm certain that Salesforce does that as part of their process, but how cool would the world be if it also aligns to the Kirkpatrick,
I mean, the
model.
whole world needs to align to the Kirkpatrick model. if we have
it our way, right?
But I think what an interesting conversation to be thinking about human-centered design and the Kirkpatrick model and evaluation, and really how can we use, it's like almost like we almost need our own human-centered, like Kirkpatrick needs a human-centered design workshop to be like, all right, customers, here are the, here's what tell me your problems. Here's what we're hearing, and tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong, right? And then help me create a solution for you that meets that need. We, not that we did a formal design workshop, but that's how we constructed the things, like our instructional systems designers that we staff, and our coaches and our consultants, right? And these like Powered by Kirkpatrick certifications in these units, as well as the new certification journey, that it's all from feedback of our stakeholders and not from what I believe that you all need, right?
So you're doing it, right? That's the thing I've always said about this human-centered design. Like sometimes I might be totally off on my definitions of it, but from what I see of it, the core of it is like literally just do it in the right direction. Yes. Go like ask people what their problems are, and then develop things, whether they're bespoke or you're ending up doing it across multiple clients who have the same problem. But this development of a product and then trying to get people to like, or a process and getting folks to like, just take it up.
To buy it.
The model, your model should be malleable enough that like folks can just sort of like, take it and use it for their own problems, right? I
Yeah.
love that. Like, yeah.
I think that it's where you actually start to see some change, right? Because you actually, you could actually listen, and people will come on board if they feel heard.
Oh, that's exactly it. That's the whole empathetic interviewing thing. And sometimes I scratch my head during this, like when folks are learning how to do this, and I'm like, isn't it just basically like what a mother or a parent or a caregiver would do naturally? Like try to, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like we call it human-centered design in the D skill, and I don't want anyone to be intimidated by that, right? I would rather get the whole like my work around human-centered design a little bit wrong than to make it this sort of elitist tool.
Correct.
Because when I really think about it, I'm like, I feel like this is what moms of multiple kids do all day long. They're like, what's your problem? Why are you crying?
Right.
What do you need? Are you hungry? Or this? Tell me about your problem and I can fix it. But you really have to tease out who said what at school to you. Like, do you not like what you're wearing? Is it uncomfortable? Right? You have to tease out all these different problems before you can solve it. And I think that's why it works, is that it's the most fundamentally human thing you can do is to ask people what's wrong, right?
Right.
And it's just so basic that I feel like everybody should be able to do human-centered design because it's in the word. It's in what's being human. Like find out what's wrong with your other people around you. Listen.
Yep.
And stop trying to solve a problem before, don't make assumptions about what they need. Ask them. It doesn't work with your kids, right? If you start just assuming what's wrong with them.
Never, literally never.
Happens?
It takes time. It takes listening. And to your point, right? It takes understanding because, and it's understanding that sometimes when they're in a bad mood, it's going to take me a little bit of time to uncover what it truly is. There's going to be lots of questions and there's going to be lots of uncovering, truly like peeling back that onion, to figure that out. But Amy,
so that anyone who's ever been in that caregiver role,
you don't have
knows how to do that.
Or just being a friend, right? And understanding that sometimes, your friend seems pissed at you. And then when you think it's for one reason, when you really uncover it, like you did something, 2 days ago and you're like, I don't even remember doing that. That's not what I meant by that. So
this reminds me of the conversation we just had with our friend Melvin, who he's such a good friend. I oversaw his training in Swahili, over a decade ago now. One of the best language students I've ever seen come through. But, now we're such close friends that, if I come to him and I'm kind of venting to him on the phone, he always says, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged?
Yes. and he dropped that on me yesterday. I was like,
human-centered design.
Melvin, yes. Yes, that's right? Exactly what it is.
Okay, right now I just want to be heard during the empathetic interviewing stage. I've got to vent to you about what my problems are. And thank you for listening, right? That's all I needed. Like if you start to, like, I've done this in relationships, right? Where you start to solve someone's problem, or if I'm dating someone and they start to like simplify and just start solving my problem for me. And I'm like, I'm not asking you to solve it. I just wanted you to listen, right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Such a common thing in relationships. And I feel like that's why this stuff works, is that it's at the core of what any kind of friendship, relationship, or colleague thing is. Like, just listen to what someone's telling you before you start to assume that or that you even already have something that you can give them. Like if you're in business, right, in that context, don't assume that what you develop for one client is going to be perfect.
Absolutely
for all these other contexts.
No, I get it wrong all the time. Amy, we have another big topic to cover. I want to bring you back to cover that because I want to spend the episode talking about it. And I want people to get to know you a little bit better. And what I want the next topic to be, or our next podcast to be, is all about this new administration, or any sort of change in administration. Budget season comes around. How can you protect your investment and show the impact of what it is that you're doing, and what are some predictors with your insight in the government space? I'd like for people to hear more of how they could retain their budget during times of change. But,
that is a big topic.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that
it would be like another whole hour
broadcast a little bit to us, within the Department of Defense, at least. And I think within like larger government is like, you better prove that the thing that you're doing is making an impact and impacting the return on investment. And if
Yeah.
you cannot do that, so gosh, I could see Kirkpatrick taking off a little bit more even, because like that's a really good question. Yeah, I'm thinking that everything that's kind of being projected out, if it comes through, that like, hey, we're going to cut things if you can't show its efficacy. And honestly, bipartisanly, from my heart, as a taxpayer, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, we should care that the things that our money is going towards work.
Yeah.
And we just have to work together to figure out what that looks like. But if you had a way to set up metrics maybe for what good looks like within programs, I don't know if it just works for training programs in the L&D space, but yeah, I could see how well, maybe you need to give Elon a call.
Well, he might be a little busy flying drones over New Jersey.
What was that? Sorry.
So he might be busy flying drones over New Jersey. But with that, Amy, we're going to pick up on that conversation next. Friends, thank you so much for listening and for participating. And reach out if you are interested in learning more about human-centered design. And we will catch you all on the next podcast.